Ethan had always dreamed of stepping into lands that were hidden from the eyes of the modern world. He was young, curious, and brave, with a heart that carried both fear and hope. His journey began when a team of explorers guided him through mountains that were tall and full of mist. Beyond the cliffs and rivers, they reached a valley where time felt slow, where the old kingdoms still lived with their secrets. The place was filled with tall towers and stone walls, banners flowing in the wind, and people moving with a grace that belonged to another age. Ethan felt as if he had stepped into a story that had been waiting for him. His companions were amazed, but Ethan's eyes were drawn to the grand palace at the center of the valley. It was there, behind strong gates, that he saw her for the first time. Princess Claire stood upon a balcony, dressed in silver and white, her presence quiet yet commanding. Her hair moved with the wind, and her eyes searched the horizon as if waiting for something unseen. She was unlike anyone Ethan had ever known. The moment felt unreal, and his heart beat faster than he could control. Through a turn of fortune, Ethan was allowed inside the palace walls. The queen of the land welcomed the visitors, though her tone carried both caution and pride. The halls were bright with torches, and voices echoed against the stone. Yet Ethan's focus never left the princess. She was close, yet far, like a dream that dared not be touched. That night, when the palace grew quiet, Ethan walked through the garden filled with roses and fountains. The moonlight made the place glow with a gentle silver. He heard footsteps and turned to see Claire, walking without guards, her face calm but curious. For a long moment they stood without words, and then Ethan spoke, his voice steady though his heart trembled. "Your eyes are gorgeous," he said, not as a courtly line, but as truth spoken from his soul. The words struck her deeply. No knight, no noble, no courtier had ever dared to speak to her in such a simple and honest way. Her lips parted as if to answer, but no sound came. She could not speak. For all her grace and all her training as a princess, she found herself powerless before such honesty. Her silence was not from anger, but from wonder. Ethan stood still, worried he had crossed a line, but her gaze did not leave him. Her eyes softened, carrying both surprise and warmth. In that silence, something greater than words was born between them. Claire turned her head slightly as if to hide her reaction, but the faintest smile touched her face before she walked away into the shadows of the garden. Ethan remained under the moonlight, trying to understand what had just passed between them. He knew he was only a visitor, a stranger in her world, yet he also felt that a bond had been made, one that no power could erase. The next morning, life in the palace continued as usual. The queen spoke with her advisors, guards marched through the halls, and the court prepared for a feast. Yet Ethan could not forget the moment in the garden. He watched the princess from afar, her composure perfect, her smile faint but guarded. Still, he knew she remembered too. For the first time, the princess felt seen, not as a daughter of the throne, not as a symbol of the crown, but as herself. And for Ethan, it was the beginning of something he could not yet name. A step into a story far greater than his own, guided by a single sentence that had changed everything. The days passed, and Ethan found himself walking through the halls of the palace more often than he expected. The queen allowed him and the other travelers to stay as guests, though her eyes often studied him with quiet suspicion. To her, Ethan was different from the rest. He was not loud or eager to win favor. He carried himself with a calm strength that did not belong to the court, and it caught both respect and caution. Princess Claire, however, looked at him with a curiosity she could not hide. The words he had spoken in the garden echoed in her thoughts. She had been praised many times in her life, yet none of those voices carried the honesty she had felt in his. When he said her eyes were gorgeous, it was as if he had seen beyond her crown and titles, into the heart she kept hidden from the world. One evening, when the sky turned red with the setting sun, Ethan walked near the edge of the palace gardens. He found Claire standing beside a fountain, her hands folded in front of her, her face lost in thought. She did not turn away when he approached, though a hint of shyness touched her eyes. "You walk alone often," Ethan said. His tone was soft but steady. "It is the only time I feel free," she answered. "Inside the palace walls, every word is watched, every step measured. Out here at least I can breathe." Ethan nodded.
Back in my world, freedom is something people often take for granted.
For the first time, Claire spoke of her fears. She told him of lords who sought power, of whispers that threatened the queen's throne, and of her own role as the heir. She admitted she sometimes felt like a bird in a cage, praised for her beauty, but never allowed to fly. Ethan listened. He did not interrupt, nor did he offer empty promises. When she paused, he simply said, "You are more than the cage they place around you." The word struck her again, and she found herself staring into his eyes, searching for any trace of falsehood. She found none. His gaze was steady, clear, and kind. She wanted to speak, to answer in a way that showed her heart, but the words failed her just as they had that first night. As the days grew into weeks, their bond deepened. They would walk under the stars, speaking of his world beyond the mountains. Ethan told her of cities that touched the sky with glass towers, of machines that carried people across oceans, of lights that shone brighter than the sun. She listened with wonder, her imagination painting every detail. In return, she shared the secrets of her kingdom, of old traditions and hidden paths known only to her family. Yet not everyone welcomed their closeness. In the high halls of the palace, whispers spread. Advisors saw the way the princess looked at Ethan, and they worried it would weaken her resolve. Some nobles spoke of danger, saying no outsider should be trusted so easily. The queen herself grew cautious, watching with eyes that saw more than she revealed. One night, Ethan overheard a group of men speaking in the shadows. They spoke of plans to challenge the queen's rule, of stirring unrest in the kingdom. He understood then that the palace was not as safe as it seemed. Danger was close, and both the queen and the princess stood in its path. Ethan knew he could walk away, return to his world and leave their troubles behind. But as he looked at Claire, standing strong despite the weight on her shoulders, he felt something stir within him. He could not abandon her. The words he had once spoken were no longer just praise. They were a vow, silent yet firm, to stand by her side no matter the cost. The palace stood tall and proud, but beneath its beauty, tension grew like a hidden fire. The queen ruled with a firm hand, but the lords of the land were restless. They met in secret rooms, speaking in low voices about power and control. Ethan could sense it in the way the air felt heavy, in the way the guards watched more carefully, and in the way whispers followed him down the halls. Princess Claire noticed it too. She sat beside her mother during council meetings, listening to the words of men who wore polite smiles but carried sharp thoughts. They bowed to the queen, yet their loyalty was thin. Claire's heart was troubled, and in those moments, she often found herself glancing at Ethan. His steady presence gave her strength even when words failed her. One evening, after the council had ended, Claire walked into the garden. The night sky stretched wide, stars glowing like silver sparks. Ethan joined her, his steps quiet on the stone path. For a moment, they said nothing, the silence speaking louder than words. "There is unrest in the court," Claire finally said, "and the lords no longer hide their hunger for the throne. My mother carries the crown, but enemies move in the shadows." Ethan looked at her with calm eyes. "And where do you stand in this?" "I stand with her," Claire said firmly. "But I fear it will not be enough. The kingdom is changing, and soon choices will be forced upon us." Ethan walked beside her, thinking of the men he had overheard plotting in the halls. He had not told her yet, but the memory burned inside him. He knew he was not part of her world, yet he could not stand by and watch danger fall upon her family. Later that night, Ethan made a choice. He followed the same path he had heard before, moving through the shadows of the palace until he found the hidden chamber. Voices rose within. He listened closely, hearing plans of rebellion, of an attack, meant to shake the throne. His hands clenched, but he remained silent, memorizing their words. The next day, he told Claire. Her face grew pale, but her eyes hardened with resolve. Knew the danger was close, she said, but to hear it so clear, it means we cannot wait. My mother must be warned. Together, they went to the Queen. At first, the Queen doubted, her gaze sharp upon Ethan. You are a stranger in my court, she said. Why should I trust the words you bring? Ethan did not flinch. Because I have no gain in this, he replied. I could leave and save myself, but I will not. I choose to stand here because I cannot walk away while your daughter and your crown are in danger. The Queen studied him for a long moment. Finally, she gave a slight nod. Very well. If your words are true, then you have done more for this kingdom than many who call themselves loyal. That night, guards were placed in secret posts, and the palace waited. The lords who plotted believed their plan was hidden, but when they moved, they found steel waiting for them. Some were seized, others fled into the darkness. The Queen stood strong, her command steady, but through it all, her eyes often returned to Ethan, who had risked himself for her and for Claire. When the danger passed, the halls grew quiet again. But the trust between them had shifted. Claire felt it deep in her heart. Ethan was no longer just a guest in their world. He was part of it now, tied to her and her family by his courage. That night, Claire stood with him at the edge of the palace walls, looking out across the valley. You did not have to stay, she said, yet you chose to. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. I chose because of you. The words made her breath catch. She looked away, her heart racing. Once again, no reply came, but silence spoke for her. She could not say what she felt, not yet, but Ethan knew. The bond between them was growing, even as greater storms waited beyond the horizon. The days after the failed plot brought no peace to the palace. The Queen's enemies had been pushed back but not destroyed. They hid in distant halls, waiting for another chance. The air inside the court was filled with caution, and every shadow felt heavier than before. Ethan stayed close, though part of him wondered if his presence was a burden. He had stepped into a world not his own, and now he carried the weight of its troubles. Still, each time he thought of leaving, he saw Claire's face, steady yet troubled, and he knew he could not walk away. One morning, as the sun poured light across the valley, Ethan was summoned to the council. The Queen sat tall in her chair, her crown bright against her dark hair. Advisors lined the room, their eyes sharp. Claire stood beside her mother, calm yet tense. Ethan, the Queen said, her voice clear, your loyalty has been seen, yet there are whispers. Some say you are not a protector, but a spy. They say you brought danger rather than uncovered it. What do you say to this? The words struck like cold iron. Ethan looked around the hall, seeing the distrust in their eyes. He could have denied it with anger, but he chose calm. I have nothing to gain from lies. I spoke the truth because it was right. I risked myself not for power, but for honor. If that is called treachery, then so be it. My heart is clear. A silence spread. The Queen studied him, her gaze unreadable. At her side, Claire's eyes flashed with quiet fire. She stepped forward before her mother could answer. I stand with him, Claire said. Her voice was steady, yet full of strength. He has done more for this kingdom than many born to it. If you doubt him, then you doubt me as well. Gasps filled the chamber. No princess had ever spoken against the court so openly. The Queen's eyes narrowed, but not in anger. She looked from her daughter to Ethan, and then dismissed the council with a wave of her hand. When the room emptied, only the three of them remained. You would risk your place for him, the Queen said to Claire. I would, Claire answered without fear. Because he is true. The Queen was silent for a long time. Finally, she turned to Ethan. Then let us see if your truth can stand against steel. The enemies of the throne will not wait. They will strike again, and when they do, you will face them at her side. That night, the palace shook with sudden danger. A band of rebels broke through the gates, their blades flashing in the torchlight. Guards rushed to meet them, but the enemy was fierce. The halls echoed with the clash of steel and cries of battle. Ethan stood at Claire's side, shielding her as chaos spread. A rebel lunged toward them, but Ethan caught his strike with quick strength, forcing him back. Claire, though not trained in war, stood tall, her voice steady as she guided the guards around her. Together, they moved through the storm. At one point, the Queen herself was cornered. Ethan saw the danger and ran to her side, driving back the rebel with nothing but a guard's fallen sword. His arm burned with pain, but he did not falter. Claire rushed to him, her face pale with fear. "You cannot fight them all!" she cried. "I can fight as long as I must," Ethan answered, his breath heavy. "Because you are worth it." The words gave her strength. Together, they pressed on, and soon the palace guards turned the tide. The rebels, seeing their plan fail, fled into the night. The halls fell quiet again, though the floor bore the marks of battle. When the last enemy was gone, the queen looked at Ethan. Her expression changed. No longer did she see a stranger. She saw a man who had risked his life for her and her daughter. "You have my trust," she said simply. Ethan bowed his head, his chest rising with deep breaths. Claire stood close beside him, her hand brushing his arm in a silent thanks. Once again, she wanted to speak the feelings that swelled in her heart, but no words came. Her silence was full of meaning, and Ethan understood. In that silence, their bond grew stronger than ever, forged in fire and loyalty. The battle in the palace left deep marks. Though the rebels had been driven away, the kingdom was far from safe. The queen ordered the halls repaired, guards doubled, and spies sent into the land to learn where the enemies would strike next. Yet inside her heart, she knew the fight was not only with swords. It was also with trust, loyalty, and the courage to keep standing when the ground shook beneath her. Ethan walked through the quiet corridors, his arm bound from the wound he had taken. Every step reminded him that he had nearly given his life for people who were strangers only weeks ago. Yet he no longer felt like a stranger. He had earned his place, not by birth, but by choice. Claire found him in the garden one evening, where the roses still bloomed despite the chaos. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and gold. She stopped before him, her eyes holding both relief and sorrow. "You could have died," she said softly. "Why would you risk so much for us?" Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "Because your life, your kingdom, your people, they are worth saving. And because I could not stand aside while you faced danger alone." Her chest tightened at his words. She had heard many men swear loyalty, but never with such plain truth. She wanted to answer, to speak what burned inside her, but once again, the words caught in her throat. The rebels did not stay hidden forever. News came that they had gathered their forces, ready to strike the palace once more. This time, it would not be shadows in the halls, but a storm at the gates. The queen gathered her captains, preparing for the clash. Ethan stood beside them, no longer a guest, but a defender of the throne. When the attack came, it was fierce. The rebels stormed the walls, their banners dark against the sky. The clash of steel rang through the valley. Fires burned at the gates, and the night was filled with cries of battle. Ethan fought with all his strength, his blade flashing in the firelight. Claire stood in the high tower, guiding her people, her voice carrying courage across the chaos. The queen commanded the defense with power. But even she saw that the turning point came from Ethan. His bravery stirred the guards. His resolve pushed them forward, and his refusal to fall gave hope to all who fought beside him. When the rebels finally broke and fled, it was his name the soldiers cried with victory. The battle ended, but the story did not. The kingdom stood safe, for now, but the bond between Ethan and Claire had grown beyond measure. The queen herself looked at him differently, no longer with suspicion, but with quiet respect. She knew he had given them more than strength in battle. He had given them faith. That night, when the fires had been put out and the halls were quiet again, Ethan prepared to leave. He stood in the garden, where it had all begun, looking at the path beyond the valley. He knew he did not belong to this world of crowns and courts. His place was elsewhere, yet his heart resisted the thought of leaving. Claire found him there, her steps slow, her face lit by the moonlight. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. She wanted to speak, to tell him what her heart carried, but again the words failed her. Her silence was heavy, but her eyes told the truth. They held gratitude, hope, and a promise she could not shape into speech. Ethan smiled faintly. "Your eyes are still gorgeous," he said, his voice gentle. "And they always will be." Claire's breath caught, and her lips parted, yet no sound came. She stood there, unable to speak, but she did not need to. Her silence was her answer. Ethan turned, knowing their story was not an ending, but a bond that would live beyond time. And as the moon rose high above the palace, their unspoken promise filled the night with light.